So pH, if you remember, is the measure of a concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. A neutral pH is described as 7. An acidic, anything below 7 is described as an acidic pH. Anything above 7 is considered an alkaline pH. So just like other organisms, they are organisms that are adapted to different pHs. So we can use this to classify different organisms. If a microorganism likes a neutral pH, we call that neutrophiles, neutral loving. I get students who classify, who confuse neutrophiles and mesophiles. Neutrophiles is neutral pH, mesophiles is moderate temperature. But our neutrophiles, these are most of our bacteria, most of our protozoans, most of our microorganisms, almost all of our pathogens are considered neutrophiles. They do well at this neutral pH. We also have organisms that are adapted to an acidic pH. So acidophiles like those acidic pH environment. These are those ones in those sulfur springs, right? Acidophiles, I love that, Yellowstone, those are our acidophiles. Now there is a difference between an obligate acidophile and an acid tolerant acidophile. And so based on these words, obligate means they have to have an acidic environment. Acid tolerant means that they have adapted to tolerate some acidity, but they usually change their environment right around them to a more neutral environment. And there's an example of that. There is a microorganism called H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori, and we have found that it is one of the causes of stomach ulcers. So ulcers, this is an inflammation in your stomach, and it degrades some of those mucous membranes in your stomach and causes damage in that. Now we know the pH of our stomach is very acidic. It's about pH 2, and it's useful and it's necessary because that's where we break down our food, right? Take that and the acids in the stomach help to break down the food. So acidic pH is great. The cells that line our stomach, the mucous membranes that line the stomach, are adapted to that, and they have special things that help them tolerate that acid in the stomach. But when you get a microorganism, Helicobacter pylori, that stays in the stomach, it can break down the mucus lining, and then your acids from your stomach can leak into surrounding tissues, and this can cause pain, and that's where you get that stomach ulcers. Now, most microorganisms can't tolerate that acidity. Most microorganisms may have adaptations that help them get through the stomach. You eat them, and then they get through the stomach as fast as they can, and they colonize our intestines. We have lots of good microorganisms living in our intestines, but most microorganisms can't handle the acidity of the stomach. This is one that can. So it's acid tolerant, and it does it by producing alkaline end products. It has some metabolic pathways, produces alkaline end products. Those alkaline end products neutralize the stomach acid, and they get pockets where it's a more neutral pH, and they can continue to grow. Their food source is the lining, the cells in your stomach, and they cause damage to that, and that's where you get that leaking of acid into surrounding tissues, and you get a stomach ulcer. So we have found that we can help people with ulcers by giving them antibiotics. If we kill the microorganism, then we can cure the infection. Now, a lot of times these ulcers were treated with antacids, Tums, Rolaids, where you take that. Well, that is an antacid. It neutralizes the acid in your stomach. So it's a very basic alkaline medicine. You take it, it neutralizes the stomach acid, and that'll give you some relief because the fluids that leak into those tissues from the ulcer are not acidic anymore. Problem with those antacids is that your stomach doesn't want to stay at a neutral pH. Your stomach can monitor that, and when the pH in the stomach rises, becomes more neutral, that triggers a series of reactions that pump acids back into your stomach. Again, your stomach is supposed to be acidic. So you take your Tums or Rolaids, you neutralize the acid, you get a little bit of relief of symptoms, but then the stomach pumps more acid in, makes more acid, pumps more in, you get symptoms again, you pop a Tum or a Rolaid, and it becomes a cycle from that. And that's not very good. But now that we know a microorganism can cause some of these ulcers, if you are positive for that microorganism, they can give you an antibiotic. They can give you some drugs to help that. We actually have some better drugs on the market now that are proton pump inhibitors. They inhibit that pumping of the acid. These are the newer drugs like Pepcid AC. There's another one that I can't. Omeprazole is one of the ingredients in a lot of them. But anyway, there are those newer generations that will stop your stomach from pumping in those acids, and so you get some relief. They're made to be used short term in conjunction with an antibiotic to get rid of the source of the problem, which is microorganisms growing. Now, that's not the only reason you get ulcers. Some ulcers can be caused by medications or other reasons, but this was a big deal when we learned what was going on, and it helps us to be able to treat our patients better from that. Okay, so that's an example of a acid tolerant microorganism. All right, let's keep going. So if we have acidophiles, we also have alkalinophiles. A lot of soil is alkaline. We have bacteria that grows there. The upper part of our intestine is usually a little bit alkaline. The intestine neutralizes the stomach acid, goes a little bit overboard. It usually is a little bit basic there. One bacteria, Vibrio cholera, and this is the pathogen that is responsible for the disease cholera. We talked about that with John Snow and causing the diarrhea. This is one that grows very well in our intestine, and you can see that. All right, let me tell you also about microorganisms in that we talked about the Helicobacter, the H. pylori was changing, it's altering its environment. It was producing alkaline end products that neutralized the acids in the stomach and gave more of a neutral pH. If a microorganism is undergoing fermentation and produces acidic end products, they can actually produce so much acid that it inhibits further growth of microorganisms. An example of this is cheese. So cheeses, if you have, which one can stay on your counter longer, cheese or milk? Milk is something we can add bacteria to it to produce cheese. It takes milk, add the right bacteria, and that bacteria grows, produces acidic end products, and actually changes the substance of the milk and can get cheese. So cheese can sit on your counter all day. It is more acidic, and it has inhibited the growth of other microorganisms because it has so much acids built up in that. Milk can only stay on the counter for a little bit. It's got a neutral pH, lots of microorganisms grow. So different microorganisms that lead to the production of cheese have altered their environment so much that it is inhibiting the growth of other microorganisms. Now be careful with cheese. Molds and fungus can still grow on the cheeses, as you know, if you've kept cheeses around, so be careful about that. But typically it doesn't grow bacteria like other products do. Now there's some differences with some soft cheeses, some differences in pH there, so watch out for that. A lot of times when you're pregnant, they say don't eat the softer cheeses. A little bit of different things going on from there. Okay, what else can we talk about? There's another body region that I want to talk about where we talked about bacteria altering their environment and changing the pH. And this is the female vaginal region. So I've pre-drawn a little bit of charts here. From that, let's talk about what's going on in the female vaginal region. We said most of your body has a neutral pH. Your stomach has a pH 2. Female vaginal region has a different pH. And let's talk about what's going on, and we'll see how this affects the pH in that region. Okay, so if I'm looking over time, I've got birth here. We've got a period of childhood, and then I have puberty and menopause put on there. First, we're going to discuss estrogen levels. So estrogen is a hormone that we make, contributes to female reproduction and sexual characteristics. And in childhood, estrogen is low. So if I were to draw estrogen levels in childhood, it would stay low until puberty hits, right? Estrogen, female hormones go up, gets crazy through that time period. And so my estrogen level at this time climbs. It eventually levels off. Thank goodness, and we get hormone levels leveled off, but at a higher level than childhood. And that will maintain until menopause, and then we get another hormonal change. What happens to estrogen levels at menopause? They drop. They do also eventually level off, thank goodness, because that's another hormonal time period going on there due to those changes in hormones and what's going on. But they do level off, not as low as they were in childhood, but much lower than they were in adulthood. So female vaginal region, estrogen production, estrogen levels in this region over time, and you can see how that climbs and then falls back due to different time periods. All right, so female vaginal region is open to the outside. We have, just like in our gut, we have good bacteria living and colonized in that region, and that's okay. We can get pathogens in that region that can cause a disease, but we have a lot of bacteria that are fine, don't cause us any problems. One of those that we find in that area is bacteria called lactobacillus. Lactobacillus is a bacteria, undergoes fermentation pathways, produces acidic end products, and we saw that lactobacillus is also the bacteria responsible for yogurt. You put lactobacillus in milk, you don't get cheese, you get yogurt. So those active yogurt cultures, that's the bacteria responsible for this. So this is lactobacillus. Lactobacillus can use estrogen as a nutrient source. So in this female vaginal region, lactobacillus is present, but when the estrogen is low, the levels of lactobacillus is also low. When estrogen climbs, what do you predict happens to the population of lactobacillus, the numbers of lactobacillus present? As a response to more food, lactobacillus also increases. So that level goes up and then levels out at this level, the amount of lactobacillus that this level of estrogen can maintain. So we get a lot more lactobacillus in this region. Menopause, again, because estrogen has disappeared, the lactobacillus levels will fall off. And there's not as much food available, so more lactobacillus dies and cannot get enough food, and then they level off as well. All right, can you so understand the relationship between estrogen and lactobacillus? Lactobacillus is a microorganism. Estrogen is a hormone we produce. Lactobacillus can use estrogen for nutrients, and so therefore the amount of lactobacillus present is a result of the estrogen levels at that time period. Okay, so let's talk about pH. Lactobacillus produces acidic end products. Now, in childhood, pH is neutral. There's not enough lactobacillus and not enough acidic end products to make a big difference, and the pH is usually around neutral in the female vaginal region. But as we get more lactobacillus, as it's making more acidic end products, what do you think the pH does? Because of that extra acid, the pH in an adult female in the vaginal region is about pH 4. So not as acidic as the stomach, but much more acidic than most of the rest of our body. In menopause, levels decrease, pH climbs again, not as close to neutral as it was before, but about pH 6. So we can see how the lactobacillus is altering its environment based on the amount of acidic end products it's doing. Okay, so what does that all mean? What do we care? What's going on here? So we said that lactobacillus isn't harmful, it's not a pathogen for us, doesn't cause us a disease. But can it help us? During this time period of adulthood, we have an acidic region going on here. What's going on in adulthood that is not going on in this region in childhood? Sexual activity. When a woman hits adulthood, sexual activity comes, she is more susceptible to the introduction of foreign microorganisms due to sexual activity. The more partners, the more susceptible she is to foreign microorganisms and that introduction of new microorganisms. Everybody's microorganisms are a little different as you get exposed to different types. So having a pH 4 in this region is some natural protection for women during this period of sexual activity. So that is a good thing. It actually helps us out by doing this, making those acidic end products and changing the pH in that region. That's why they tell you not to do those douching and those types of things. Those alter the pH. It's better to go with those natural things. We already have some protection from that. So pH 4 is good. Now, do remember that there are pathogens, there are bacteria that have adaptations that can overcome this and live in this acidic region. Gonorrhea, syphilis, other types of sexually transmitted infections. So your take-home message is don't use a condom because I have some natural protection. That's not the take-home message here because there are pathogens that can overcome this. But this pH of 4 is a help. That's also the reason why they tell you to urinate after sex. Rinses out all of that microorganisms, flushes out all those microorganisms that were newly introduced. So that all helps. Another thing, childhood, you do not get that natural protection. Childhood is a period where children are very susceptible to sexually transmitted infections. So in fact, if there are children that are getting recurrent urinary tract infections or other things going on, that could be a red flag for sexual abuse. Not always. Now, there are UTIs that are caused by other regions, but that is one of the things that a doctor will investigate if you have this, because they don't have this much protection. They're a lot more susceptible to a lot of different sexually transmitted diseases. So if there is sexual activity going on in this time period. Okay, so let's talk about grandma. What's going on here? Okay, so grandma, well, a couple of years ago, decades ago, Little Blue Pill came on the market. They advertised during Super Bowls. Viagra came on the market. Viagra was developed as a heart drug. One of the side effects was increased blood flow to certain areas of the body. And so men were able to maintain erections for a longer period of time. So this has allowed sexual activity to occur later in life than it had previously due to some medical interventions. So we have a lot more of increase in sexual activity in men in this time period in life. So the women have responded, and they are more sexually active. Again, we're living longer lives, and so they are more sexually active in this time period than they were before. But there are changes in the vaginal region, and this can be a problem. They are more susceptible to sexually transmitted infections because they do not have this protection that they did before. Another thing is they're not worried about pregnancy. So condom use in this time period of life is lower than it was before. They may also not have the education or maybe embarrassed. They may have had long-term monogamous partners and then found themselves in a stage of life or something different was going on. So this is different as well. So the fastest growing age group of sexually transmitted infections is, as you would expect, right here. But the teenagers and the young adults here, the second largest group of newly diagnosed sexually transmitted infections, this area. This is just something to be aware of as a medical professional. Usually when someone comes into the men and women come into the doctors, you're a lot more concerned with diabetes and high blood pressure and those types of issues. So sometimes the patients are embarrassed and won't bring it up. But sexual education in this and how to protect yourself against sexually transmitted infections in this age group is also very important from that. Okay, so a little bit of take home. We talked about grandma, something you'll probably remember, but definitely the relationship between lactobacillus and pH and estrogen levels and how all this interacts and how a microorganism can change and alter its environment. Okay, so that's it for pH. We will pick up in the next video. Thanks, guys.